We can talk about earthquakes this morning. I experienced my first earthquake that I recall was when I lived down in Southern California, and it's a weird feeling when terra firma isn't quite as firma as you expect, and things just moving around. And I remember being in there was a room. The people I was staying with had a pool, and that pool just sloshing out, and it was just strange and weird. And I think about the earthquakes and specifically. I don't know. I guess they don't happen often here, right? I was looking up, and so apparently, can't see it very well, that we've had a few. This is, we had one 4 days ago. I literally got this morning. So 4 days ago, we had a 1.6 at Mount Hood Village, and a 2.6 also at Mount Hood Village. Here's a whole bunch of Mount Hood Village. Coos Bay had one. And these are the ones just over the past. So in the past few weeks, we've had half dozen of the ones that are 1.5 magnitude or greater. And so, they happen, but obviously they're really small. We don't feel them much. And if we were to allow for all earthquakes, then below the 1.5 as well, but we have tons. We actually do have a fair amount. But what I'd love to talk about is the idea of predicting them, right? Like if you were to try to predict an earthquake, and you were going to say, you know what, I hereby take a stand, I'm going to bet my money that there's an earthquake tomorrow, you'd be right. You'd be absolutely right. We have roughly about 2,000 earthquakes globally each day. So 2,000 of them. And then I said most of them are too small to feel, but yeah, about 2,000 of them a day. So you'd be right. Well, so maybe you decide, okay, well, I'm going to change that parameter. I'm not just going to say an earthquake somewhere in the world. I'll be more specific. I think there's going to be one next year somewhere near the San Diego area. And you'd be right. There's roughly 12,000 or more a year just in that area. Again, most of them are too small to feel. So what if you say, okay, well, I'm just going to, the big ones, the 7+ magnitude ones. And we're going to have one of those sometime next year. And you'd be right. There's about 18 of those globally each year. But if you want to get really good at a prediction and have it at a very specific time, a very specific day, a very specific location, a very specific magnitude, we can't do it. We are not able to predict earthquakes. The U.S. Geological Service says the best we can do is we can tell you when they've started. Even if they've started really small, like we can tell you, and that we think this one's going to get bigger, but if you want ahead of time notice, it's going to be in this place of this magnitude or greater at this time, we simply cannot do it. But we are convinced it's going to happen. How many years have we been hearing about the big one that's supposed to happen here? Right? Some huge, over 7+, probably 8 or 9 that's supposed to be affect Portland and the bridges. And notice, Multnomah County is trying to raise money for a bridge so at least one of them will survive when the big one happens. And all we can give is a percentage. Right now, the U.S. Geological Service says that there's about a 37% chance that the big one will happen sometime in the next 50 years. What do you do with that information? What do you do with that? How helpful is knowing that? At some point it's like, well, I don't know, do I buy extra water this week? You can't really, in many ways we don't, and we're so used to hearing it. We've been hearing it so long that for some of us we're just like, either it happens, it doesn't happen, I don't know. And hidden behind that is a certain level of, I don't really think it's going to happen to me. I don't think I'm really going to be affected. I have to admit, when preparing for this week, as I look at this, I'm like, okay, well, as far out as we are, how bad would it be if it did happen? But again, it's like, well, if it happens where? And when? Who knows? Right? But I think we'd probably be, I don't know. But the truth is in life, I think we have those same kind of things. There are earthquakes in our life that are life-shattering, life-altering, huge magnitude things that affect everything, specific to our lives in our times. And we're not going to be able to predict when they happen. But they happen to us. They will happen. And so, simply start off with an earthquake is coming. The way Jesus put, I love in John 16, he says, he was talking about a whole bunch of things that were going to happen to people. But he says, I've told you these things so that in me you may have peace. Because in this world, you might have some difficulty. That's not what it says, does it? You will have trouble. I think the King James says tribulation. You will have tribulation. But take heart, I've overcome the world. That Jesus is saying, you're going to have it. The truth is when I have come here to this world, and though God is in control, there is problems, there are difficulties, there are troubles. You're going to have them. I'm not saying that you're going to be rescued from them. In fact, I'm saying just the opposite. You are going to have trouble. It's a given. We've been doing this series we call 1 Year to Live, where I talk about this idea of let's pretend that we were only promised this year, which is obviously a thought experiment because none of us are even promised this year. But let's pretend that we are promised this year and that we know that by the end of the year that this is our last one. Would we live any differently? And I think one of the things we have to cover, if we want to talk about really living for this year, we've got to prepare for the fact that there may be an earthquake. It happens. You know, you're going along in life and there's this marriage that you know of that's just completely unbreakable. You have a parent who exercises well daily. You have a business or a job that's just doing really, really well, and then the earthquake comes. A divorce happens. A heart attack happens. An economic change and a bankruptcy happens, and all of a sudden you are hit with something you weren't expecting, something you weren't prepared for. And what happens in the midst of that? Have you ever noticed that some people, as Christians, for some of them during times that are really difficult, they can talk about, I shared a week or two ago, Tim Keller talking about when he got his cancer diagnosis, that he wouldn't have changed that for anything, that it really drew him and his wife closer to the Lord. And that there are people that do seem that when they have these really difficult things, they do draw closer to God. And then there are others of us who become more bitter, more angry, that we're frustrated with God, and even going, God, how could you? Why did you let this happen to me? Why? I want an answer. I'm mad at you for allowing this difficulty in my life or in the life of people I care about. And if you are interested in becoming more of the former, I want to suggest 3 things that I think Scripture talks about that we can do to prepare to be sheltered in the time of our inevitable coming earthquake. The first blank in your outline is to have a solid foundation. I'm using that image of foundation because, Jesus uses it in a different context with a different story when he's talking about floods. You're familiar with this, right? Jesus is given a parable and saying that, if I'm going to talk about the difference between building your house on sand and building your house on a rock, here's what he says about the rock. Everyone who hears these words of mine and puts them into practice is like a wise man who built his house on the rock. The rain came up, the streams rose, the winds blew and beat against the house, yet it did not fall, because it had its foundation on rock. Now, this idea of building on a rock versus building on the sand, and we hear the story and we're thinking, yes, of course, it's better to build on a rock than it is to build on sand. But I caution you, maybe not. Right? I mean, let's not give those sand people dismiss them too quickly. I can't call them sand people. Tuscan Raiders. Yes, I'm sorry. If you got that reference, I love you. So, but no, the truth is that when folks, it's easier to build on sand. It's not as hard work. You're able to produce way more home on a sand in the same amount of time that you could on a rock. That the kind of digging, especially with ancient tools, the kind of stuff you would have to build a foundation on a rock, that would be really difficult. And to think, you see a bunch of people building on sand, and they're like, wouldn't it be better to build on a rock? And they're like, well, I don't know. I mean, it might be better if there's a storm, but how often does that really happen? I can build 10 houses. I can have a huge real estate empire by the time you build your one little home on a rock. I can have all these kind of things. And look at all these other people. I know a guy down the street who built houses on sand, and he's built tons of them. He's been fine. I don't know why you're so worried. Like, we can hear that kind of stuff, that we imagine life is just going to be like it's been. And most days it is. Back to the whole prediction thing. You want to predict what tomorrow's going to be like? Your best bet is that tomorrow will be a lot like today. Temperature-wise, government-wise, economy-wise, climate-wise, it's probably going to be pretty much the same. Most of the time that is true. That the people who are building on a rock are doing it for those cataclysmic, those times when it happens out of nowhere. So I don't know, like, what do you tell people? I don't think you could just tell them risks and percentages. Well, in about 50 years, there's a 37% chance you're going to have an earthquake. And that somehow changes people's behavior? I don't know that it does. I mean, do you know people in this area that are trying to say, I am going to do differently in how I purchase a home, or how I build a home, or how I live in a home, or where I choose to live, or how I choose to work, or where I choose to be, because of the potential in 50 years that there's a 37% chance of an earthquake around here? Or do we just get caught in these, this is the way I see things done, this is the way it feels good now? And we have people doing that. And how do you even tell? I mean, you can't really tell till the earthquake comes, till the storms rise. Because people can say, well, yeah, I have my foundation. I have my foundation solid. Do you? I mean, it's in many ways our lives are like tubes of toothpaste. We don't really know what's in them until we squeeze them. And when we get squeezed, what really we've put into our lives is what comes out. And folks, I have to believe, I wholeheartedly believe, you are interested in making sure that you build your home, you build your life on a foundation of rock, that Jesus is saying, well, okay, take these words of mine, put them into practice. Focus on Christ and His Word and do what He said. Like, that is a foundation to live by. That is a foundation that can weather the earthquakes or the storms. And I have to tell you, at least in my experience, this is never a one-and-done thing. I can't tell you how many times during my day, or at least my week, that I have to constantly realign my vision and say, this, I was talking with Caleb this morning. As he says, just trying to figure out how to, I don't remember the exact word, but how do I honor a God in a world that is just not very honorable? How do I follow God that isn't very interested? That wasn't the exact term. Do you remember it, Caleb? Yeah. And I said, yeah, that's my struggle as well. But then I have to add the fact that I have a wandering heart. That my heart seems to keep wandering. And so even if I figured out what it means to follow God, that the truth is I find my focus often shifting and I have to move it back. But I think sometimes thinking in terms of the calamity can be really helpful. I mean, think about, money. Right now our government, our legislature here in Oregon is trying to come up with a budget. Budget times are happening, and they're talking about how they have so much money right now because of all these federal programs, but they can't seem to figure out what to do and do that. And you realize when you have all that kind of money, you ask very different questions than you do when money is tight. And when money is tight in your own life, don't you sit there and have a whole other algorithm for how you live? You're like, no. We need to make sure we're spending just on the important stuff. The urgent stuff, we need to spend only on these things. All these other things, these are nice. I would love to have those, but this is what I've got. And I wonder if we might do that spiritually from time to time and just say, I've got limited resources in terms of time and attention. What am I really spending it on? What is the foundation? So have a solid foundation. Secondly, build strong pillars. As I make this a second point, the truth is in many ways it's kind of the first point. But I think what happens is when we talk about having a firm foundation, building our life on God and building on Christ, I think just about every Christian I know would say, yeah, I do that. Yep, it's done. But is it? Just because we say it, are we truly building? And so one of the ways to look at is look at the pillars in your life, the things that are holding everything up. The things that you have in your life that are connected to your foundation, and that maybe in many ways are much easier for you to see and for others to see. And you have that, and that's holding. It's an important part. That without the foundation, it's meaningless. But if you've got the foundation, then you can look at that and say, are these pillars really representative of the things I want in my life? Have I really built my life on it? How do you figure that out? You know, I ask people, this is really common, and I think this is probably one of the main pillars I see most people in America, certainly out here in Oregon, Portland area, the things that they say they're important. If you ask them, what's really important in your life? Now, if you're a church, they might go, Jesus. But if you ask them, what do you want? Maybe another way to ask it, what do you really want for your kids? For those who have kids, they'll say, what do you really hope? And they'll say, I just want my kids to be happy. And you know what I think they're saying in part is like, that's really a pillar. Whether it's their life or my life, I just want to be happy. I want to be happy. And life is this constant struggle of trying to get out toxic, yucky, hard, difficult things and try to amount as many days as possible that are good and fun and make you smile. And we'll call that life-giving, and we'll call this life-draining, because life is about happy, because that's a pillar. I want happy. Maybe we won't say happy. Maybe when asked, well, you know, what would you like out of your life? You know, we're talking to our graduates as well and thinking, what do you want? And well, you know, I would like to be rich. I'd like to be famous. I would like to, you know, retire when I'm 22. Like, I don't know. Whatever it is, right? You have those things. But really what you're saying is, I just want to be happy. Yeah, that'd be another example. I want to win the lottery. I don't want to work for it. I don't want to have it. Or maybe I'm willing to work for it. But really, as I think about the pillars in my life, what is it that's really, really important? Maybe it's relationships. You know, I'm not just a materialistic guy. What's really important is I find that significant person out there, that one that's meant for me. And if I could just have that, or I could just have friends and the right kind of friends and spend my time and hang out with them, like that would make for a good life. And I think all those things are the pillars in our lives. And as we look at it and we begin to see, this is what we're building our life on. This is what we're putting on the foundation, that to make this shelter for life. And I submit that if that's really your pillar, then maybe your foundation isn't what you think it is. And instead, are you having pillars that are consistent with the foundation? There are a few lists in Scripture. There are a number of them, and we talk about finding your life verse sometimes. That is a way to just be really clear about one of those. You know, we have a saying around here. We are here to love God, love one another, and live out our faith every day. The reason we do that, and we repeat it as much as we do, we have it out there in front of the coffee. I'll say it most mornings. I should have this morning so I could have proved it. I could say every morning, But the idea is that to give us pillars, to say this is what we do. If Jesus is really our foundation, He and His Word are our foundation, then we want to love God and we want to love one another. We want to live out our faith every day. Matter of fact, we take that from this verse. When Jesus was asked, you know, if what is the greatest commandment? And He says, well, okay, I can't limit it to one. You've got two of them. And He replied, love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your soul, and with all your mind. This is the first and greatest commandment. And the second is like it. Love your neighbor as yourself. I feel like there's a whole other sermon in that linking between loving your neighbor as yourself and how you love God. And I think there's a lot there. But this point is saying all the law and the prophets hang on these two. Everything is really helping us understand what it means to love God. When we have the rest of God's Word, when we have His commands, He's explaining this is how you love God. This is how you love people. You think you're loving God based on something else. You think you're loving people based on something else, but I'm telling you what it is. All the law and the prophets are there to help you live out those realities. And so those are really good pillars. And the question is, are you living according to those? This is why we're here, folks, as a church. I mean, some of us, we came here because hoping for a miracle, hoping for some healing, hoping for something in our lives. But really what God wants of us is that you and I work together to help one another live out the pillars of our life based on the foundation of Jesus Christ and His Word. Discipleship and learning and becoming more. Folks, if nothing else, like if you were in a place and you're like, I just want to take another step. I want to get some sense. I would love to have a conversation with you. Just figure out what that is. I don't know if I can be helpful in that, but maybe I can be helpful in connecting you with somebody who can be helpful. Or maybe just meeting on a regular basis, saying, let's talk about the things of the Lord and learn and grow and figure out what it means to build these pillars in our lives, to have a relationship with God. Because you're going to need it. I remember talking with somebody in college who was just she had a really rough time. She had mainly to do with losing a relationship that was really important to her, and she knew me, so she said, hey, can we talk after class? And so we went after class and we met in the library and we were just talking, and she broke down and said, I need to know how to have a relationship with God, because here I am right now, but things falling apart and I wish I'd already had one. I'm hoping you're not in that place, in the place of desperation, but what it takes to get you there. But the key is to weather those earthquakes. I love that she knew to weather that. That's what she needed. Have a solid foundation, build some strong pillars, and lastly, invest in community. I'm pausing here because I'm not very confident in my ability to convince you, if you're not already convinced, how desperate it is and how essential it is to build a church. The term church in Greek, ecclesia, it literally means the gathering. We all know it's not the building, it's the people. It's the people that are gathered together to try to figure out what it means to love God, love one another, and live out faith every day. The people that are willing to do that, and how desperately we need one another to make that. And the truth is I know I'm trying to swim upstream even talking about it. Here in the Pacific Northwest, we mirror a lot of what's happening throughout the nation, and that Christians, not just people who don't believe in God, but those who have committed their lives to Jesus and just think, you know what, church isn't that important. I mean, if I can fit it in, if I'm not too busy, if I don't have relatives over, if I don't have things going on, if I don't have places to be, like I fit it in, but fit it in. And again, not just our Sunday service, but just life with one another. And we are, every one of us, by even being here this morning, is way already against the trend. And so I think trying to convince people that that's necessary and essential is going to be hard. I think it's vital, though. I was talking to somebody doesn't go to church at all. And their dad was a missionary, and so he had this upbringing and this background, but was just feeling desperate and alone. And he called me, and he said, Bill, like I don't like the place that I live. I've got some scary people next door. Can you find me a new place to live? Like maybe there's somebody in the church who can take me in. And I'm like, dude, I don't even know you. Like, I'm not going to just call somebody from the church and say, hey, and the people I know that have taken people in, most of them are either already have somebody with them or are in a place that they can't right now. I mean, I'll keep my ears open, I'll ask around, but I'm not going to find something, definitely not in the next 6 hours. And his response was, oh, what a shame, God has left the church. What did that mean? I wanted something. You didn't give it to me. The church is useless. Because really, that's really what church is about. I just show up with my 170 pounds of need. Yeah, I wish. But no, I just show up with my needs, and everybody meets my needs, and then I'm good, and that's good community. And if that doesn't happen, then oh. And I think we have that sense, and yet I'm telling you that I think there's something so vital. On the other side of that, you and I working, and it's going to be so hard. It's going to be so hard because there's nothing in our culture that teaches this. And there's everything in our culture that wants to push us away from this. But you and I living life together. And when I say it's hard, like, I don't know. What does that mean? Does it mean I have to come over and mow your lawn? I don't mow my own lawn. I don't know what to tell you about that. But it does mean something about being connected, about having that. So when the earthquakes come, it's like we have this place. I remember the day my dad died. I was in high school. He had died in an auto accident. He was a trucker on the road and died. And it happened on like a Tuesday. And we had our normal youth group on Wednesday. And I had to go. I had to go there. I didn't know what their agenda was, what was going on, but I had to be there because I knew I needed about other people who in the midst of my pain and my grief would be able to say, I don't have the answer, Bill, but I want to point you to one who does. I can't fix this for you, but I can pray for you. I needed a community of people that are going to help me see reality in the midst of this earthquake I was experiencing. And that's it. But here's the key. Here's the real key. I wasn't sitting home that Wednesday night waiting for them to come to me. I went. I showed up and I said, I want to invest in this community even in the midst of this. Like when things are hard, I'm there. Because it's so essential and I need it. Right? We know the passage in Ecclesiastes. No, I hope so. Hope we have it memorized because I don't have it up here. Ecclesiastes is a great book, by the way. It's my favorite. And one of the reasons it's favorite, if I can't really preach on Ecclesiastes very well because it's this whole book that you have to go through all the chapters, all 4 chapters almost at once to make sense of it. So I encourage you to read it because really, in many ways, the book of Ecclesiastes is the book about earthquakes. When this fails and when this is gone and when this doesn't work and when you try all this and this fails, what do you got left? What do you got left? And it's beautiful in the summary that it gives. But in part, as it's working up to that summary, here's one of the things that Ecclesiastes mentions in 4:9 through 12. 2 are better than 1 because they have a good return for their labor. If either of them falls down, one can help the other up. But pity anyone who falls and has no one to help them up. Also, if 2 lie down together, they can keep warm. But how can one keep warm alone? Though one may be overpowered, 2 can defend themselves. And a cord of 3 strands is not quickly broken. Talking about this idea of life together. And in our increasingly separated, divided, politically and socially and class-wise kind of world, families broken, here we've got a place and you've got a chance. I don't know that we'll do it perfectly, but hopefully we can do it better than the world is doing and saying, let's just live life together. So here's my homework for you. I want you to go drink coffee with somebody else. Have a meeting, have a lunch, I don't know, have a conversation, write a card, write a note, call somebody up and say, okay, I know Pastor Bill told us to do this, but I chose you. And just with somebody you don't live with, that you go to church with. And just say, I just want to make a connection. Or send an email going, okay, there, did it. And let them respond, okay, I did it too, good. But realize even that is going to be far better than most people get. And to learn for us to live life better. I mean, we can do it. It happens in small ways. Luke called me. Dad, I locked my keys in the car. He says, do you have a spare key? And I'm like, no, I've been telling you forever. Give me one. He said, I can call AAA. And he says, Dad, you got to hurry. My phone's almost dead. Well, as I'm having this conversation, I happened to be in the room. Amy was in the room and said, call Sean. We'll get him out there. And sure enough, Sean had some, I don't know, stuff. I think a balloon and a stick or something that got him into a car. I don't know how it works. But he says, yeah, where is he? I didn't have to explain. I said, hey, Luke locked himself. And he says, yeah, I'll do it. I'm like, do you want to know where he is? He's like, sure, tell me on the way. He was just going. He goes. And the funny thing is, Luke had no clue because his phone died. We couldn't get a hold of him. So Sean just shows up. Hey, bud, Need help? Got on the road. Or, I think about last week, Penny. I just called Penny because we had transportation issues. Hey, can you pick up Rachel to church? Sure. So small things like that, they matter. Living life like that matters. It can be bigger things. I think about, I know Luke and Rachel and Lexi went over and saw Valerie the other day, or a couple weeks ago when she was struggling. Naverna passed this past week. I know Sony was going and seeing her every week. Just to live life, to help weather those storms. I don't know if that convinces you, but I think it's going to be vital for us. So here you go. The thing is with all these things, I don't know how convincing I was, but I think how essential they are. Ultimately, it's our choice. I was looking back, and God was talking to Israel and saying, you got a choice about how you want to live life. You can just say, yeah, God's my foundation. You could do that. It's not going to do you any good, though. But those of you who wholeheartedly really want to reorient your life and have me at the foundation, it's going to matter. Matter of fact, he says it this way in Psalm 50. Call on me in the day of trouble. I will deliver you, and you will honor me. And I was hesitant to share that because, that idea of deliverance, it's like, great, that means Jesus is going to solve all my problems, and I won't have the trouble anymore. I don't think that's what God is promising at all. I think we want the miracle. But what Jesus is really offering is his presence. And maybe you've heard it said, you never know that Jesus is all you need until Jesus is all you've got. Well, I think that's a little simplistic because I think sometimes people, they don't bother having Jesus as their foundation. So Jesus isn't enough for them when the earthquake comes. Jesus was an add-on. I want to be happy. I want to be smiling. I want to have the good life. Oh, and we'll add Jesus in there too if I can, and where it feels good, where it's appropriate. But then compared to those who say, you know what, this is where I want to orient my life. And God says that for those of you who really want to orient your life, as he's talking to the nation of Israel, for those who really want that your gratitude and the sacrifice, they matter. For those of you who don't want to orient your life that way, it's not going to matter. And you've got no one to call on. Do you want the presence of Jesus? Let's pray. Lord, I want a lot of stuff. I want to be rich and famous and healthy and wealthy and wise. I want to be disciplined and stylish and, oh yeah, I want you to. But I need to remember that that kind of life, that kind of living is not going to weather life, much less the earthquakes. When the things come that are devastating, to know, Lord, that no matter what happens, whatever kind of devastation or earthquake happens in my life, that you've already won, and I can tie into that. Lord, forgive me for being such an idiot. For my wandering heart that wants to invest in anything else but you. And Lord, of course, you've never asked for me to just go live up on a hill and just pray, that you have a life for me to live that involves caring for my wife and my kids and my church and my community, that cares about this environment and all these things that you've put on the plate. But Lord, I want to have them in proper order. You first is the foundation. Then living out those pillars as you've called me to that are consistent with you. And Lord, I thank you for this church. I thank you for the people in the small ways that are challenging themselves by your conviction to just live out what it means to be people of faith with one another. Help us to be better at that in Jesus' name. Amen.